right, strap yourselves in, because today we are diving deep into some pretty choppy waters.
Yeah.
The U.S.-Canada trade standoff as of February 2nd, 2025?
Right.
Now, you folks have been sending in some news, and it looks like President Trump's new tariffs
Oh, yeah.
have really sparked a fire under Prime Minister Trudeau.
Yeah.
So basically,
Yeah.
Trump has slapped a 25% tariff on a whole bunch of Canadian goods,
Wow.
with an extra 10% hit specifically on their oil and energy exports.
Whoa.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
This isn't just some boring economic policy debate, you know?
No.
It's about this historically close relationship being put to the test. And honestly,
Yeah.
how this impacts everyday folks
Right.
on both sides of the border.
On both sides.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with that one.
Yeah.
These tariffs, they're a classic example of how you can take a seemingly boring economic tool
Right.
and it becomes this really potent symbol of political friction
Yeah.
and the potential fallout.
Yeah.
It's not just about dollars and cents.
Yeah.
It's about the ripple effects on global markets. And let's face it, it's about national pride, too,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
that gets stirred into the mix.
So let's break this down a little bit. First things first.
Yeah.
What exactly are tariffs,
Right.
and who ends up actually paying for them?
Good question.
Yeah.
Good question. In the simplest terms, a tariff is basically a tax
Okay.
that's imposed on imported goods.
Right.
And this is where a lot of people, I think, get confused.
Yeah.
It's not the Canadian businesses that are footing the bill directly.
Right.
It's the American businesses importing those goods
Okay.
that pay that extra 25%.
So they're the ones that get hit with the tariff first.
Yeah, and then often they pass that cost on to you, the consumer, in the form of higher prices.
I see.
Yeah.
So essentially, Trump is betting that Americans are going to be willing to shell out more
Yeah.
for American-made products.
Yeah.
Boost those domestic industries and all that jazz.
Yeah.
Classic protectionist move,
Uh-huh.
but does it work?
Well, that is the billion-dollar question.
Yeah.
And history gives us a very mixed bag of answers.
Okay.
Protectionism, by the way, just so we're clear,
Yeah.
is the idea of shielding a country's domestic industries from foreign competition
Right.
by using tools like tariffs.
Okay.
It's been tried for centuries.
Has it now?
Sometimes with the intended effect, sometimes backfiring spectacularly.
Wow.
You've got to remember that today's world is far more interconnected.
Right.
So actions like these
Yeah.
can trigger a chain reaction across global markets
Yeah.
in ways that are pretty hard to predict.
And speaking of chain reaction,
Yeah.
Trudeau's response was anything but subtle.
He didn't mince words.
He really didn't.
No.
He didn't just address the Canadian people.
Uh-huh.
He went straight to the American public,
Right, to the...
appealing to that shared history,
Yeah.
those common values. And even those we've got your back moments
Right.
that have really defined the U.S.-Canada relationship for, what, centuries now.
Absolutely. He strategically invoked these key moments like World War II,
Yeah.
the Korean War, even Canada's aid during Hurricane Katrina,
Right.
and the recent California wildfires.
Right.
And let's not forget
Yeah.
the really powerful reminder of Canada's unwavering support after 9/11.
Yeah.
It was a deliberate move
Yeah.
to highlight this longstanding cooperation between the two nations.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like saying, hey, remember when we stood shoulder to shoulder?
Yeah. It was a pretty powerful emotional appeal, I got to admit.
It was.
But then he pivoted
Yeah.
to a much more specific point of contention.
Yeah.
One that's been kind of a recurring theme
Mm-hmm.
in U.S.-Canada relations.
Yeah.
Border security
Right.
and the Sentinel crisis.
Big one.
Yeah. Trump has often pointed the finger at the Canadian border as a source of this really dangerous drug. But Trudeau pushed back against that narrative pretty hard.
Yeah, he did.
And he came armed with stats.
He did.
He stated that less than 1% of illegal fentanyl entering the U.S. actually comes from Canada.
Wow.
But here's the kicker.
Okay.
He then goes on to say, we hear your concerns,
Mm-hmm.
and we're already taking action.
Okay.
He highlights a $1.3 billion border security plan that's already in motion,
Wow.
showing that Canada is being proactive regardless of the finger pointing.
That's a very clever strategy.
Isn't it?
Yeah, he acknowledges the shared concern over fentanyl,
Right.
while simultaneously debunking the claim that Canada's the primary source.
Right.
So it subtly undermines the justification for these tariffs, wouldn't you say?
I would say so for sure.
Yeah.
But Canada isn't just sitting back and taking it.
No, they're not.
Trudeau announced retaliatory tariffs of their own,
They did.
and they're targeting a very specific list
Okay.
of American goods
Interesting.
to the tune of, wait for it,
All right, lay it on me.
$155 billion.
$155 billion.
This isn't some empty threat either.
Okay.
He laid out a clear timeline.
Right.
$30 billion worth of tariffs kick in on February 4th,
Wow.
the same day the U.S. tariffs take effect, followed by another $125 billion after a 21-day grace period.
Hold on. That grace period's interesting.
It is.
What do you make of that?
I think it shows a level of calculated restraint.
Okay.
You know, giving Canadian businesses a little breathing room
Okay.
to adjust,
Mm-hmm.
maybe find some alternative suppliers.
Right.
It also keeps a window open for potential negotiations
Yeah.
or, fingers crossed,
Mm.
some kind of de-escalation.
Right.
But make no mistake,
Okay.
these retaliatory tariffs are designed to hit where it hurts,
Where's that?
the average American consumer.
No, this is where the everyday impact becomes very real.
Exactly.
We're not talking about some abstract economic indicator here.
No.
We're talking about things you might actually have in your shopping cart.
Right.
American beer,
Yeah.
bourbon, orange juice, fruits and veggies,
Right.
clothes, shoes, furniture, even sporting goods.
And to really drive the point home,
Okay.
Trudeau wrapped up his speech with a really powerful call to action for Canadians.
What was that?
Choose Canada.
Choose Canada.
He's encouraging folks to rally behind domestic industries.
Okay.
Maybe swap that Kentucky bourbon for some Canadian rye
Okay.
and consider vacationing within Canada instead of heading south.
Interesting.
You know,
It's a fascinating appeal to national pride and economic self-reliance.
it is.
But does it have legs?
Yeah.
Can it actually shift consumer behavior in the long run?
Right.
That's what we'll dig into
Exactly.
in the next part of our deep dive.
That's what we're going to find out next time.
All right.
So we just talked about how these retaliatory tariffs could make things, pricier for American shoppers.
Right.
But what about everyday Canadians?
Yeah.
Could they actually see any changes
Oh, absolutely.
because of all this?
This isn't a one-way street. You know, while Trudeau's urging Canadians to choose Canada,
Right.
those tariffs on American goods,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to likely mean higher prices on things that Canadians import.
Okay.
Think about that summer vacation you might have been planning
Yeah.
to Disney World.
Uh-huh.
It just got a whole lot more expensive.
Wow.
Maybe a camping trip to Banff National Park starts looking more appealing, eh?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So both sides might end up paying more
Mm,
for things they used to take for granted.
yeah,
It makes Trudeau's call to choose Canada even more intriguing.
right.
Is that patriotic appeal enough
Yeah.
to actually change people's shopping habits long term?
Mm-hmm.
Or will people just go for the best deal,
Yeah.
no matter where it comes from?
It's a great question, and there's no easy answer.
Right.
There have definitely been times when those appeals to buy local or support our own
Yeah.
have really resonated with people.
Okay.
Think back to the surge in patriotic spending after 9/11.
Right.
Yeah. But those bursts, they tend to fade.
So you're saying folks might rally around the flag initially, but eventually their wallets just went out.
Exactly.
Mhm.
In the long run, it's
Yeah.
really price and quality and convenience
Right.
that usually drives consumer choices.
Makes sense.
And here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
If these tariffs drag on
Hmm.
and people on both sides of the border start feeling the pinch,
Yeah.
it could actually create pressure for a resolution.
So basically, because no politician wants angry voters who can't afford their favorite things.
Right. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk tough on trade,
Mm-hmm.
but if those economic consequences start hitting home,
Right.
it could force both sides back to the negotiating table.
Yeah.
But let's zoom out even further here.
Okay.
This isn't just a U.S.-Canada spat.
Right.
What does it mean for the rest of the world watching all of this unfold?
Yeah, if two countries with this much shared history and honestly like integrated economies
Yeah?
can't seem to get along,
Right.
what message does that send? Are we heading toward a future where everyone's just looking out for themselves?
Yeah.
Building walls instead of bridges?
That's the million-dollar question.
It really is.
Is this the start of a broader trend
Yeah.
towards protectionism?
Mm-hmm.
Countries turning inward, putting up trade barriers.
It's a scary thought.
It's too early to say for sure,
Right.
but the standoff is definitely a worrying sign.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
So we've got potential price hikes, political pressure, maybe even a ripple effect on global trade.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another piece of this puzzle we haven't really touched on yet.
What's that?
The human cost.
Oh, yeah.
What about the people whose jobs depend on that cross-border trade.
That's such a crucial point, and one that often gets overlooked in these big picture economic discussions.
For sure.
Think about it.
Right.
Tariffs can disrupt these really complex supply chains we all rely on,
Right.
and suddenly businesses that depend on importing goods or exporting their products are facing huge uncertainties.
Yeah.
And that can lead to job losses.
Right.
And those losses ripple through communities,
Absolutely.
creating hardship and even social unrest.
So it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
No, it's not.
These policy decisions have a real impact on people's lives.
Right.
Their ability to, put food on the table, keep a roof over their heads.
Exactly. And it brings us back to that question of national pride versus economic reality.
Yeah.
Trudeau's calling for Canadian solidarity.
Right.
But could similar Buy American campaigns actually strengthen Trump's hand?
Right.
Even if it ends up hurting American consumers in the long run?
It's a thought-provoking question for sure.
It is.
If enough people on both sides buy into this like us versus them mentality,
Yeah.
wouldn't that make finding a solution even harder?
Absolutely. It could create this dangerous feedback loop.
Yeah.
Politicians see that support for their tough stance,
Right.
even if it's based on this, simplistic us versus them narrative, and it becomes that much harder to back down.
I see.
That's why it's so crucial to look beyond the rhetoric, to
Okay.
understand the complexities of these issues,
Yeah.
and to recognize that cooperation, not isolation, is ultimately in everyone's best interest.
So as we watch this whole situation unfold,
Yeah.
we really need to be wary of those who try to divide us, to pit one country against another.
Right.
The real solutions lie in finding common ground,
Yeah.
fostering dialogue, and remembering that our economies and really our lives are inextricably linked.
Well said.
Thanks.
Now, in this final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
we're going to step back and look at the historical context.
Right.
Have we been down this road before? And what lessons can we learn from the past?
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
Tariffs, political maneuvering, the potential for things to get expensive for folks on both sides of the border,
Right.
even the risk of this spreading to other countries. Yeah. But let's step back for a moment.
Okay.
Look at history.
Yeah.
Have we been down this protectionist road before?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
History is full of these cautionary tales.
Okay.
When it comes to countries trying to wall themselves off economically. In fact, the most glaring example is probably the one that sent chills down the spines of economists for decades.
Okay.
The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act.
Smoot-Hawley.
Yeah.
That rings a bell, but
Yeah.
what was it
Okay, I
exactly?
could picture this.
Like-
The 1930s.
Okay.
The Great Depression is in full swing.
Yeah.
The U.S., in an attempt to protect American farmers and industries, slaps these massive tariffs on thousands of imported goods.
Sounds familiar.
Right. The idea was to force Americans to buy American,
Okay.
but it backfired spectacularly.
How so?
Well, other countries weren't too happy about being shut out.
Right.
They retaliated with tariffs of their own, and what started as an attempt to shield the U.S. economy ended up triggering this global trade war.
Wow.
Trade plummeted.
Yeah.
Economies shrank even further. And a lot of historians believe that Smoot-Hawley actually deepened and prolonged the Great Depression.
So it's not as simple as protect our own
No,
and everything magically works out.
not quite.
There are consequences,
There are.
and they can be pretty dire.
Yeah, and that's the crucial lesson here.
What's that?
We live in a globally interconnected world,
Right.
for better or for worse. When one major player starts throwing up trade barriers, it sends these shockwaves through the entire system.
Makes you wonder if anyone in Washington is cracking open a history book these days.
I hope so.
Yeah.
But look, it's not just about dusty history lessons.
Right.
This U.S.-Canada standoff has the potential to impact your life right here, right now.
Right.
We've talked about the hit to your wallet, the choices you might have to make as a consumer,
Right.
but let's not forget the folks whose livelihoods depend on that cross-border trade.
Yeah, those job losses that we talked about. Those are real people, real families affected by these decisions made in Washington.
Absolutely. And it all circles back to that question we posed earlier.
Okay.
Could this surge in Buy American sentiment,
Right.
even if it hurts some consumers,
Yeah.
actually end up strengthening Trump's position in all of this?
If folks dig in their heels on both sides of the border,
Yeah.
convinced it's us versus them, it feels like that would make finding a solution even harder.
It could create this dangerous feedback loop.
Right.
That politicians see that support for their tough stance.
Yeah.
Even if it's based on this simplistic us versus them narrative,
Right.
and it becomes that much harder to back down.
Yeah, I see your point.
That's why it's crucial to look beyond the rhetoric,
Mm-hmm.
to understand the complexities of these issues.
Okay.
And to recognize that cooperation, not isolation, is ultimately in everyone's best interests.
So what's the takeaway for our listener today?
Well, I hope they come away with a healthy dose of skepticism towards those simplistic solutions, an awareness of how interconnected the global economy really is, and maybe a renewed appreciation for those historically strong ties between the U.S. and Canada.
Ties that honestly feel a bit strained right now.
They do. But here's the thing, listener. You're not just a passive observer in all of this.
Right.
Pay attention. Ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And don't let those in power off the hook with easy answers.
Right.
This trade standoff is a story that's still unfolding.
Yeah.
And it's one that will impact all of us in the months and years to come.
Absolutely.
Stay informed, stay engaged,
Yeah.
and keep those critical thinking caps on.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah.
We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic. So until then, stay curious.